Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have a very special guest here on for an interview. Thank you so much, Heidi Trefethen, for coming on the channel. Heidi does a lot of things in the music industry, actually. So I'm going to start listing some things off, and I'm sure that she will, in her introduction, kind of expand on a lot of these things. But she's a professional French hornist. She's a multi-instrumentalist. She is a sound engineer, producer, composer, and also is involved with the Grammys. She's a Grammy voter, I believe, correct?
I am. Grammy voting member? Yep.
So thank you so much, Heidi, for taking the time to come on the channel.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It's so exciting to be here and to spend some time talking with you.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. So,
Likewise.
for those that aren't super familiar with your story, can you, as far back as you want or as more recent as you want, tell us a little about who you are in the music industry and what you do in the music industry, and just tell us about your story, how you got here.
Well, where do I begin? And thank you for that intro. Yeah, I've been in the music industry for over 30 years, I would say. I started playing piano when I was really young. My grandmother was a concert pianist, and she started me playing when I was about two. And music was always a huge part of my growing up. My father played the piano. Yeah, very musical family. He sang a lot, and there was always music being played in my house growing up. And I don't ever remember a time when music wasn't a big deal. Um, I started playing French horn when I was 9 years old. I grew up right outside of Seattle in Bellevue, and when I was in fourth grade, the Seattle Symphony came to my elementary school to perform, do some educational outreach, and I was just totally transfixed by the whole experience. And that was the point where, when the band, the elementary school band, was recruiting, and so they wanted me to play the flute or the clarinet because that's what girls play, right? We don't play the horn, but I
Hmm.
really wanted to play the horn. And with the support of my parents, got me a French horn and started playing. And I immediately took to it and was immediately getting first
Hmm.
chair throughout
Wow.
all of elementary, junior high, and high school. Around that time, my uncle gave me his all of his Beatles cassettes and his stereo. I think he was moving abroad or something. And I was playing around with the balance knob on the stereo, and I noticed when I play the Beatles cassettes, the way that it was mastered then in stereo, the vocals were panned to one side and the music was panned to the other side. And so somehow I figured out I could take that cassette tape to my parents' VW bus, which I grew up in. Play the tape, and I took my those tape recorders, old school ones, put a blank tape in that, and
Wow, cool.
panned the Beatles cassette so that only the music was playing, and then I sang on top of that, and that was my first overdub. And I was
That is really
always
cool.
interested. Yeah, I don't know how I figured that out, but it was just something I was playing around with, and always had an interest in how music sounded while listening to it, and was able to
Mm.
listen to each element of a song individually. And yeah, that was my first overdub. And I did some recordings of my own, like, early podcast on the cassette. So
Wow. Like,
yeah,
how recent was that? Like, or how long ago recent was
that
that?
was, well, that was when I was about anywhere from 9 to 11 years old. So I had all of these cassettes of me recording myself.
For podcasts, you're saying though.
Yeah, they didn't exist yet,
Well,
but that's
that's
what
my
they
that
would
was
be.
my
Yeah.
follow up
Yeah,
question
this was
exactly.
back in the day.
Yeah, no, that's why I found it actually pretty interesting, that comment, because podcasts are. I mean, I remember when podcasts were like a thing, but nobody actually cared, and they were on Apple Music and or it's iTunes at the
Exactly.
time, and I don't know, that must
Exactly.
have been 15, 20 years ago. So I was curious about that comment about your first podcast. I'm like, that's kind of like, so I mean, so far we're you're still in your childhood years, but
Hmm.
you got the innovator Heidi going
Yeah,
on in here. The learning how to overdub herself in her parents' VW van.
I know. It's
Creating a
hilarious.
podcast. Like before they really even think. Like I love that, man. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was just, a clue of what was to come in my
Sure.
life. So I played French horn, throughout elementary, junior high, and high school. And I actually got a full scholarship to go to Idlewild School of Music and the Arts. Now it's called Idlewild Arts. And I spent my junior year there, and we had a very intense program. So we had actually went to a college prep boarding school for my academics, and then when the school day was done, we went back to Idlewild Arts, and we had chamber music rehearsals for a few hours until dinner, and then after. And then I got into Juilliard. I actually
Wow.
auditioned for Juilliard as a junior, got in, decided I didn't want to go to a conservatory because I wanted my world to be much bigger than a practice
Mm,
room in a conservatory. So I
very
ended up getting
interesting.
yeah, right. I ended up getting a full scholarship to Brigham Young University and studied horn there. And actually didn't take any engineering classes. I wanted to, but I just didn't have time. The music program there was very demanding and really required a lot of my time and attention. So I was principal horn of the orchestras throughout the 4 years there.
Can I pause really quick with a quick question? I'm curious before we go farther. I always find it really interesting when individuals go to school for a specific instrument, not so much on the individual aspect, but their community around them. So, like, you mentioned that your parents were there was always music around, and there was music in the house. But I'm curious your parents' take, or with the support or not support of like you going for a specific instrument, because the reality of the world, like whether you let people like it or not, specific instruments are super hard to get into. They're super niche, especially
Hmm.
orchestral instruments or band instruments like the horns and stuff, right?
Yeah,
So I'm curious. It is possible, obviously. You're living proof for that, right? But I'm
right.
curious their perspective when you were like, "Hey, I want to study the French horn."
Hmm. Well, they were super supportive.
Hmm.
They were always like with the piano, after we moved, away from my grandmother, who initially started teaching me, they had me in lessons, and they could always tell that I had musical talent,
Mm-hmm.
just from playing the piano, but also I would make up my own songs and was always listening to music of some sort, and
Mm-hmm.
so they were very supportive. They wanted me to excel. They took me to lessons each week. They took me to my Seattle Youth Symphony rehearsals every week, across the bridge into Seattle from Bellevue. Um, just made sure that I had access to anything
Yeah,
really. And I'm so
that's great.
appreciative of their generosity and support. I mean,
Hmm.
I couldn't have done that without them.
Yeah,
So, did that answer your question?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Um, Now, my follow up to that is, what was your long term goal going to school for the specific instrument? What were you looking to do when you were studying that? And then I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
continue along on your story. I'm just curious, just picking
Right.
your brain.
Right. So I thought my specific goal was to audition for an orchestra and spend the remainder of my career playing in an orchestra, and also doing chamber music. But I had so many interests in music that I realized that I wouldn't be able to do them all if I
Mm-hmm.
only focused on the horn.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to explore the other areas of my musical talent, especially engineering. And so after I left school, I came to San Francisco. And I live in Oakland right now, and I've been here for quite a while. And I did some freelance playing, and I did a little more studying. Um, and then I really, really, really decided that I wanted to get more into engineering. And so I did a 9-month program in San Francisco at California Recording Institute. That was, I think, it was about 9 months long. Yeah, that's right. And that was in the late 90s. And so I learned on a Harrison 48 channel console, and also learned on 2-inch tape. And at
Mm-hmm.
that time, Pro Tools was very low priority. Like, it was not necessarily an afterthought, but we really hadn't gotten into
Mm-hmm.
digital fully. So I learned how to bias a tape machine. I ran a lot of sessions. I was the only, let's see, one of two women in that class, about 50 students. And so, yeah, there still aren't that many of us, but there are
Mm-hmm.
many more.
Absolutely.
But that was the time when there were so few women. in engineering.
Yeah.
So that gave me a really good basis to move forward in my career. And actually, my first job was at a venue where I still work called Freight and Salvage in Berkeley. And I took my resume down there and I talked to the director and said, I really want to work here. I love acoustic music. And I really always had. You know, my mom actually played the acoustic guitar when I was really little. She would sit me right in front of her and she would practice,
Oh,
her
that's
Joni
cool.
Mitchell songs. Yeah. And also sing Judy Collins. And there's a really cool full circle moment, which I'll tell you about
Yeah, I heard that
with
in one of
regards to,
your speeches, you were or like you were given a lesson or a lecture or something, and I heard that story. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I would love to hear it again because the audience can hear it. But
yeah.
whenever you get to that, absolutely.
Oh, sure. So anyway, I got the job at Freight and Salvage. It's now not that easy to get a job at Freight and Salvage, but I've worked with some really incredible people,
Hmm.
like Michelle Indegocello, Don McLean, Herb Alpert, and Lonnie Hall. I've worked with Joan Armatrading. I mean, there's just so many. Judy Collins, um, Cowboy Junkies, Ricky Lee Jones, just to name a
Well,
few.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I actually worked with Pat Metheny in November. That was really
Wow.
cool. He had a
Yeah, I
3-day
bet.
or 4-day residency there.
Wow.
Anyway, October of I think it was 2022, Judy Collins came to Freight and Salvage, and I was working with her, and I actually was able to fly my mom out to visit and bring her to the concert. And then afterward, I got permission to bring my mom backstage, and she met Judy Collins, who she's always loved. And so that was a
Yeah.
really cool full circle moment
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
her playing
Absolutely.
Judy Collins songs when I was little on the guitar to working with her and introducing
That's so cool.
her to my mom. Yeah, it was really
Absolutely.
special.
I
Yeah,
bet.
it was really cool. So in June, I will have worked there for about 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so after school, I worked there. I did a lot of freelance sessions and started, you know, doing recordings. And then I actually applied for Berklee College of Music because I wanted to do film composing
Hmm.
and an engineering program. And so I got in, I moved out there, and I was studying with the principal of the Boston Philharmonic or Boston Symphony, and that was to get a scholarship because I would do a French horn like double major. Um, and this orchestra in Rome, Italy, contacted me to apply for a summer festival, and
Oh
so
wow.
I got into that orchestra and played um, one summer there. And at that time, there was an audition open with the Rome Opera Orchestra. And I took that audition and I actually I won the audition. And then I decided instead of going to Berkeley, I moved to Rome and I played in the orchestra for about 3 years.
Wow.
And it was an incredible experience. Never had I understood Italian opera
Hmm.
before until I had played it there in Italy
Hmm. That's
with an
amazing.
Italian orchestra. Yeah, it was quite something. And so I came back and to the States 3 years later and started doing sessions again and freelance horn playing. And gosh, one thing led to another. I started working at SF Jazz. Actually, before that, I started working at Cliff Bar and Company, where I was a sales manager doing Costco stuff. But also, I was the AV tech. We had a theater, and I was there for about 5 years, I think. And at the end, the owner, who is a trumpet player, decided to get a band together. And he asked me if I would learn the trombone. And so I said, sure, why not? And he bought me a trombone. So we had this band together of all Cliff Bar employees.
That's wild.
And yeah, it was crazy cool. It's like really interesting how it all came together. And we competed for the Battle of the Bands, corporate Battle of the Bands at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
That's so
and
wild.
we
Who else was in
won.
that competition? Well, what other companies?
I can't remember. Um, honestly, like, I think Deloitte and Touche was in there.
That's so wild.
Yeah, it was a really, really cool experience. And our picture of our whole band is still in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That's so
So
wild.
I'll always remember that. It
Yeah.
was a really cool experience. And then after that, I was invited to a jazz festival to perform in the jazz festival in Italy
Mm.
from contacts that I had while I was living there playing the orchestra, and also to be a judge for the jazz competition. And so I decided I wanted to do that, but Cliff Bar didn't want to give me vacation time, which I understand. Um, and so I decided to leave Cliff Bar and Company for that gig in Italy.
Hmm.
And I was in an article in the paper in Tuscany about the jazz festival and the competition, and was interviewed and et cetera, et cetera. That was a great performance. And then, I just came back home after that and started doing music full time. Whereas before I had the job at Cliff Bar and I was doing music kind of part time.
Hmm.
So I started teaching at SF Jazz. I taught Pro Tools and music production. SF Jazz is like jazz at Lincoln Center,
Hmm.
but of course in San Francisco. And started working again at Freight and Salvage, mixing live, and again doing freelance sessions and playing horn in orchestras. And then I started mixing front of house and monitors at SF Jazz as well. Um, and started going to NAM and um,
Are you going to NAM
networking
next
pretty
week
heavily.
or this weekend? When is
Um,
NAM? NAM is
yeah,
soon.
it's tomorrow through
Yeah. Okay.
Sunday. Yeah,
Yeah.
are you
Yeah.
going?
I am not. No, but I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying that they were going,
Yeah, it's a
and I
good
was
time.
like, so
It's
that's
really
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I've had some really cool experiences there.
I
One
bet.
time, I think it was in 2014, my mentor at the time, his name is Brian Bell, introduced Herbie Hancock
Oh
to,
wow.
to synths and computers. And he was Herbie's engineer for a long time. So um, we spent a day together with Herbie
That's
at
wild.
NAMM, walking around,
That's
and then
so
had
wild.
a ride in his Tesla, which is pretty novel,
So
at
wild.
the time in 2014, or maybe
That's
it's
true. That's
2015.
definitely true. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but I
That's
had
so
some
wild.
really great
You
experiences.
have
It's
some
cool.
very wild experiences. If I could,
Yeah,
comment on a couple of things before we
yeah,
continue. The cool part about hearing people's stories is as a listener, as you hear essentially the whole life story, right? Now, granted, when I hear these life stories, it's a little bit of confirmation bias because I know where you are today, and
yeah,
sometimes the journey can be a little rocky. For
yeah,
example, leaving Cliff Bar and Company, like you don't necessarily have a backup plan, and you have this plan right here, but then what happens when it's done? And now I see where it
mhm,
is. The final product, but you don't have that. So I take everything with a grain of salt, and I hope the audience takes everything with a grain of salt. Like these are big decisions, and one of the things I want to comment on is looking at the thread of your life, how so many times for example, you turn down Juilliard, you turn down
hmm
and end up this, which is incredible, like the opportunity to go to Juilliard is incredible, and you decide that you
yeah,
want more than that, Same
hmm
thing with Berkeley. You decide you had
yeah,
the opportunity to go to Berkeley,
hmm
the best of the best go to Berkeley, and you decided you wanted more than that essentially. And it's
yeah,
interesting that I'm taking notes as we as you're speaking. One of the things I wrote down is
hmm
that you turn down these conservatories, but you're always advancing yourself
right.
even further. And I find that really really
Mhm.
interesting. Is that sometimes we can put ourselves in these boxes. It's like, oh, it's just
Right.
the right thing to do. Going to Juilliard is just the right thing, but like
hmm
it would put you in this box, in a box you don't necessarily want
hmm
to be in. And I found that really really fascinating and encouraging, because I think that how many people would say that missing, like in the moment, skipping Juilliard was the wrong decision. Like, what are you, like, crazy? Like,
I
it's
know.
Juilliard, and like obviously confirmation bias, it pans out for you, right? But in that
Right.
moment, people must have thought you were
Right.
crazy.
I think so, especially my teacher, my horn teacher at the time, really, really, really thought I was making a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And my parents, were definitely supportive. and wanted me to do what I felt was right. But that's really true. So I didn't want to put myself into a box,
Yeah.
and I did continue to advance and excel.
I really
And I,
admire.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I really.
no, no,
I just
no.
want to say I really admire your. I don't know. I guess fortitude would be the word. Fortitude to do what you feel
Thank
is
you.
right for you. I think that
Yeah.
so many people kind of just follow a line.
Hmm.
Even I would say to some degree, as an artist, as a as a musician, right? Whatever, however you want to, whatever hat you want to wear. We're already living a bit outside of the lines,
Totally.
and then when you go even further outside of the lines, so like going to Juilliard or Berkeley or any of these schools is already outside of the lines because it's still not a conventional job, right? You'd be a
Exactly.
French hornist, so you're already
Right.
the black
Right.
sheep, right? And now you're not even a
Exactly.
black sheep. Now you're turning down those opportunities to do something even
Hmm.
different. You're like,
Right.
I don't even know what you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
commend that, and I commend your fortitude to
Well, thank you.
say no, say like to do what you feel is right, and just again following the thread in this conversation and hearing the things you're saying is it's really interesting to hear. And I don't know if you notice these things as you say them. You several times you said, "Oh, I got a call for this. I got a call for that," and it's interesting. The thread would be essentially relationships, but more so just essentially saying yes to opportunity that created these relationships to put yourself out there that then created the next relationship that created the next opportunity and then just continued that snowball effect.
And that's a really good point. And this is one of the things that I tell people who I mentor or my students is that everything that you do is a building block
Absolutely.
for your goal, for reaching your goal. And do one thing every day to get yourself closer to your goal once you've defined it.
Hmm.
And yeah, everything is just a stepping stone to
How do
your
you
destination.
how do you define your goal? What would you say your goal would be?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. That's a tough question.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think my goal, and it's changed over time,
I bet.
and it continues to change. And right now, my goal is to do the work that brings me joy, that brings me happiness. And of course, that's in music, and it will always be in music. I've wanted to do composing. I've wanted to, make a beautiful record and win a Grammy. That's certainly a concrete goal. But I think overall, it's to do work that brings me joy and
Hmm.
happiness
Yeah.
and that fulfills me right here. And I think once I set that, everything else follows. And if I make every choice with that goal in mind, then I know I'm on the right track.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Two comments about that is one, the first comment being like to pursue essentially a career that you enjoy, right? To paraphrase what you're saying, to do the work you love is your goal. And it's interesting when I find in myself, I have my certain,
Mhm.
goals or mission statements, whatever you want to call it, business
Hmm.
mission state, whatever, right?
Right.
Um, I find myself most frustrated
Hmm.
when I realize that I'm focusing on things that aren't actually in those goals, and or stressed or worried or whatever the case is. And it's like, YouTube's a big portion of my work at the moment. Supporting my music and everything, right? So then when I start focusing on the analytics or how videos are performing, none of those answer like things are in my goals.
Hmm.
Like
Right.
I'm not my goal is
Right.
not, oh, I want
Hmm.
I don't know, I want to have this many views and that's not my goal. Like, but
Right.
as soon as I start focusing on those things, I
Hmm.
get stressed or frustrated. I'm like, oh, I'm not where I want to be. But like as
Right.
long as, like, for example, one of my goals is to put the best music I can out there, right? And,
Right.
and hopefully influence people with my music. Like
Hmm.
that's the goal. As long as I'm trying for that, it doesn't matter how many views or how it performs. But it's really
Right.
interesting when we get sidetracked from these goals.
It really isn't. It's so easy to,
Oh my
especially
gosh,
when we live
every
in a
day. I think every
culture.
day I'm
Yeah,
sidetracked.
I know, totally. It's so easy to to get sidetracked or to you know lose your focus on the goal.
You had mentioned that your goal is to pursue the work you love. Was
Hmm.
that, and you said that like that'll always be in music. Was that always an opportunity for you, or like for example, you had mentioned working at Cliff Bar and Co. Was that out of necessity because you needed to support your music? And the reason I'm asking is because I think that
Hmm.
so many musicians sometimes can't support themselves, financially in their career at first, and how that what that
Right.
transitions looks like. And I just want to hear your story.
Yeah. So I got that job after I came back from living in Italy for 3 years, and I definitely needed that job um, to support myself as I was transitioning back into, living and working in the States, which actually was interesting because I was actually went through quite a bit of culture shock coming back to my own country. That's a whole other story. Um, and so, yeah, I took that job because I needed to support myself while getting back into music here. And luckily, Cliff Bar& Company was a really unique company in that they encouraged us to pursue and actually gave us paid time to pursue things like music
Wow.
or, take a yoga class or every day or, you know, um, go biking, something like that. So it was a huge departure from the normal corporate culture. And again, the CEO and founder, Gary, was actually a musician. He was a trumpet player. And so there was always an emphasis on creativity and thinking outside the box and, definitely supporting work-life balance. And so that is how I was able to do, or I was encouraged to, do music also part-time. And I got really comfortable in that job because
Hmm.
it was such a great environment and it was, steady income. And so I didn't have to do music full time. Um, but I definitely wanted to, especially when, you know, Gary bought me the trombone and we started playing in the band and won the competitions and then I got the call to, be part of that jazz festival. And I had already taken vacation, and so I didn't have any left, and that's why I decided I needed to pursue that. And
Which I admire. It takes some serious guts
you
to
know,
leave
one of
the
yeah.
comfortable corporate sector.
Yeah, yeah. Giving up steady income, very predictable income, and a predictable life is very risky, actually. And
Absolutely.
I'm someone who actually is not risk adverse at all. And I think it's probably
Like you
because
are
I
risk
play the
adverse.
horn. I am not. Like, I actually enjoy the
Oh,
challenge
okay.
of
Yeah.
risk.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Did
So
I?
am I.
Maybe I didn't.
And I'd be curious
Yeah,
to like poll music artists and see where they
yeah.
land on that. But I love taking
Uh-huh.
risks. My wife is
Me too.
very different than that. She's a nurse, so I want to start a podcast one day called Both Sides of the Brain because like we use very different sides of our brain. And
Right.
But
Right.
I'd be curious to see the artist brain on how they handle that. I agree. I'm very similar in that aspect of like, give me the risk. I want to take it. Let's do it. I mean, I dropped out of college and people thought I was crazy. So
Yeah, exactly. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right.
absolutely.
One of my favorite sayings is jump and the net will appear. And that I think speaks to having faith that things will work out. And I really believed that I would be able to make it work. And I still believe that.
I was just speaking with somebody, and they were talking about the way that for example, like the way we speak,
Yeah.
influences so much, and not so much of this hocus pocus, but
Mhm.
I believe in the sense of like it's a outlook on life. If
Yeah.
I say, oh, the problem is this, you see
Hmm.
that as a problem, or like I can't figure out how to do this, as opposed to like seeing these frustrations as an opportunity to like or seeing the opportunity in something. You know what I mean? Like you said, like
Right.
how many people would say, oh, you're gonna leave your corporate job for a 1 week gig in Rome? Like that's not possible. You know what I mean? But then just seeing the opportunity in that, you know what I mean, and saying, I'm gonna make it work, and then by being open to that, the belief that it can work, well, you make it work.
You make it work. Exactly.
Exactly.
And I've always been very sure that I could make a music career work.
Hmm.
Um,
Were there
It's not to
times that it didn't
say,
look like that?
no, there weren't times that it didn't look like that. I just knew that I needed to work harder and play the long game.
Hmm. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Whereas every opportunity, every networking opportunity, or every work opportunity that you have that you show up for is a stepping stone to something else. You know, doing one thing every day to get yourself closer to your goal. And I knew that it would take a long time. I didn't know how long it would take, but um, just, you know, with that belief, just moving forward every day
Hmm.
and being committed to doing what I loved to do and loving it, even during the challenging times, all of those aspects helped me to get to where I am.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely. No,
I
I really,
have I did I explain did I answer your
absolutely, yeah,
question?
yeah, for sure. Thank you, and I appreciate your perspective very much. So, I'd like to pivot a little bit more to what you're currently doing, and and talking about the things that you are doing at the moment. And also, I'd
Yeah.
like to ask, what it means to be a voting member in the Grammys, and talk about your experience with that and how you got involved with that. And because I think that a lot of people will find that side really interesting as well, because you don't really hear about that side of the industry.
I've been a voting member for about 5 years. I got into the academy. You have to have two recommendations from people in the academy or outside the academy, and they actually don't even have to be in the music industry. And so I was actually mixing Sean Colvin at Freight and Salvage, and someone in the audience came up to me afterward and told me I did a great job. And that person happened to be Leslie Ann Jones, who's the director of film and scoring at Skywalker here in Marin County. And she's a seven-time Grammy winner and a legendary engineer. And it turns out, well, so I asked her, "Are you Leslie? Are you Leslie Ann Jones?" And she said yes. And I said, "Oh, it's so great to meet you. I'm a huge fan of your work." And we realized that we both live in actually the same neighborhood.
No, it's
And
too
so
funny.
I, yeah, I asked her if she would be interested in, having lunch sometime. And she said yes. And we ended up developing a friendship. And eventually, I think about maybe 6 months after we started spending, time together socially, she said she wanted to talk to me about the Recording Academy. And I actually didn't know too much about it, but I knew what the Grammys were for sure.
Of course,
And
yeah.
so she talked to me about it and asked me if I was interested in possibly being a member. And I said, yes, of course. And so we found another person to recommend me. And you actually do have to have verifiable credits to be admitted into the Recording Academy. And so I became a voting member because I had the credits, the recording credits. And about a year later, I was encouraged to run for the board. And so for the last 4 years, I've been a governor on the board of the San Francisco chapter. And I vote on the Grammys every year. I've gone every year except I think 2021 when it was only televised. It's a thrilling experience and it's so inspiring to be in a group of people who share the same goals and passion for
Wow,
music.
very
And
interesting.
yeah, I served as DEI ambassador to the national team for about a year in addition to that. And this year I am the chair of the producers and engineers committee
Wow.
for our chapter.
So, can you explain a little bit more as to what these roles mean?
Yeah.
Like being on the board or with the chair of the producers, and like what each role represents, and the responsibilities of each role?
Yeah. So all of these positions are, you know, the being a governor on the board is you go through the process of an election. So we're elected by our peers in our chapter. And being a board member is a huge honor because we get to vote on different policies and initiatives that have a huge impact
Hmm.
on the music industry at large and not just our
Mm-hmm.
chapter.
Yeah.
So we do things like District Advocate Day, where we meet with representatives of our state, our community, Congress people actually, and senators to make a political difference that, right, that helps music creators all
Wow,
over.
very interesting.
Yeah. Um, the DEI ambassadorship was fantastic. There was one ambassador from each chapter. There are 12 chapters all over the country. And we actually implemented the first inclusion writer for the Recording Academy. So that meant, having access for um, disabled people, um, you know, uh, suggesting that, for example, women of color are hired to do technical work for the Grammys, like engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Um, they've so it's been about maybe almost a year and a half since I've been DEI ambassador, but they're doing some really great things. So we want, as leaders, we want the Recording Academy to be a place where everyone belongs.
Hmm.
And so I'm also heavily involved in Women in the Mix, which is a group of women in the Recording Academy who are engineers and producers. And, we are creating change. I think less than 5% of music creators are women
Wow.
still. Yeah, it's something I'm really proud of. I
Yeah,
love
absolutely.
being a part of it, um, being working with people who share the same passion for music and also for diversity. Yeah.
I'm surprised by that statistic. Actually, it's just pretty wild statistic.
It's wild. It's great that it's changing
What
very
does that the
slowly but
statistic
surely.
encompass? The 5%, is it just in the industry period or in a specific sector of the industry?
Producers and engineers.
Oh, okay, okay.
So
Yeah, I would
less than
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
5% are
yeah,
women
yeah.
or gender diverse people.
Very interesting.
Um, yeah, and so that informs also my work with Women's Audio Mission, where I currently teach. I teach level one and live sound classes in addition to Pro Tools certification for Women's
Wow,
Audio
very cool.
Mission. Yeah, that's an organization here in San Francisco that trains women and gender diverse people to become engineers and producers.
Very cool.
So we are trying to close that gap. And I'm still teaching at SF Jazz. I teach recording, mixing, and mastering classes in person and online in the digital lab. And I teach session recording and Pro Tools certification and a mixing class at Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And still playing the horn in orchestras all over the area.
So
I
the
still do
the
sessions.
the
Mhm.
album that you would win your Grammy with, what would that music sound like?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know. It could be my own because I'm working on my own music as well. I compose
Which,
electronic music.
okay, very cool. That was a question.
Yeah, yeah. And or it might be for, another artist.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So, that is definitely a concrete goal.
Absolutely. I
Um,
love that.
I
So
will
what
be winning a Grammy in the future.
amen to that. Preach.
Yeah.
I appreciate, you know what? I mean, I appreciate the confidence, and I think that some people scoff at the confidence and say, "Oh yeah, okay," kind of thing. But I think that you have quite the track record of life that confidence has carried you very far, and you've accomplished a lot with it. So I think that you have a reason to be that confident with it, and I admire it. So
Thank you so
definitely keep at it.
much. Thank you very
Not that my
much.
opinion matters in it. I just am
It
saying
does
that
matter. I really
I'm saying
appreciate that
that
feedback.
I
Yeah,
admire it for sure.
thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story, and
You're
I
welcome.
definitely know that anyone that will listen to this has been and will be inspired by it, and
Oh,
and
thank
hopefully
you.
encouraged to continue doing what they are doing in the music industry. So, I really
Me
appreciate
too.
it. If you can hang out for 30 seconds more, I just want to say thank you to every viewer or listener that watched or listened to this conversation. Definitely go check out Heidi and all the things that she's up to. Go follow her on the social media platforms and go check her out. So, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you all. Thank you, Heidi. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys
So
in the next
welcome.
video.